Good morning. Merry Christmas. You know, Christmas to me has always been an amazing time of year. And to me, it goes back to a time, and I can remember this vividly. I was in a car. I was actually at a drive-thru at a fast food place. Isn't it crazy where these thoughts land on you, right? And I was sitting and I was really young, and all of a sudden the message that came through to me loud and clear was the true story of Christmas. In other words, what was going on there? So there's this story that we all hear about Jesus, and that's how we celebrate Christmas from a traditional Christian standpoint. But what came through me that morning was the real understanding of Christmas. Now, at the time, I didn't fully understand it metaphysically, what it meant. But what I did know was that there was a message and there was something that was going on with the story of Jesus that had a lot more to do with what's going on than the traditional story that we hear about at Christmas time. And so I thought what would be really fun this morning is to share a little bit about that with you. And so what we're going to do this morning, our family, our Christmas family, is we're going to hear the traditional story, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take a minute, and then we're going to hear the metaphysical story. So with that in mind, I'm going to let Leah read the traditional story of Christmas.
The first reading is from Matthew. These are the facts concerning the birth of Jesus Christ. His mother Mary was engaged to be married to Joseph, but while she was still a virgin, she became pregnant by the Holy Spirit. Then Joseph, her fiancé, being a man of stern principle, decided to break the engagement, but to do it quietly, as he didn't want to publicly disgrace her. As he lay awake considering this, he fell into a dream and saw an angel standing beside him. Joseph, the son of David, the angel said, "Don't hesitate to take Mary as your wife, for the child within her has been conceived by the Holy Spirit, and she will have a son, and you shall name him Jesus, for he will save the people from their sins. This will fulfill God's message through his prophets." When Joseph awoke, he did as the angel commanded and brought Mary home to be his wife. But she remained a virgin until her son was born, and Joseph named him Jesus. Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. At about that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the newborn king of the Jews? For we have seen his star in a far-off eastern lands and have come to worship him." King Herod was deeply disturbed by their question, and all Jerusalem was filled with rumors. He called a meeting of the Jewish religious leaders. "Did the prophets tell us there was a Messiah, that a Messiah would be born?" he asked. "Yes, in Bethlehem," they said, "for this is what the prophet Micah wrote." Then Herod sent a private message to the wise men, asking them to come to see him. At this meeting, he found out from them the exact time when they first saw the star. Then he told them, "Go to Bethlehem and search for the child, and when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him too." After this interview, the wise men started out again, and look, the star appeared to them again, standing over Bethlehem. Their joy knew no bounds. Entering the house where the baby and Mary, his mother, were born, they threw themselves down before him, worshiping. Then they opened the presents and gave him gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But when they returned to their own land, they didn't go through Jerusalem to report to Herod, for God had warned them in a dream to go home another way. After they were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up and flee to Egypt with the baby and his mother," the angel said, "and stay there until I tell you to return, for King Herod is going to try to kill the child." That same night, he left for Egypt with Mary and the baby, and stayed there until King Herod's death. This fulfilled the prophet's prediction. Herod was furious when he had learned that the wise men had disobeyed him. Sending soldiers to Bethlehem, he ordered them to kill every baby boy 2 years old and under. both in the town and on the nearby farms, for the wise men had told him the star first appeared to them 2 years before. This brutal action of Herod fulfilled the prophecy of Jerusalem. When Herod died, the angels of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and told him, "Get up and take the baby and his mother back to Israel, for those who were trying to kill the child are dead." So he returned immediately to Israel with Jesus and his mother. Now, the reading from Luke 2. About this time, Caesar Augustus, the Roman Empire, decreed that the census should be taken throughout the nation. Everyone was required to return to his ancestral home for this registration, and because Joseph was a member of the royal line, he had to go to Bethlehem in Judea, King David's ancient home, journeying there from the Galilean village of Nazareth. He took with him Mary, his fiancée, who was obviously pregnant by this time. And while they were there, the time came for her baby to be born, and she gave birth to her first child, a son. She wrapped him in a blanket and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the village inn. That night, some shepherds were in the field outside of the village, guarding their flock of sheep. Suddenly, an angel appeared among them, and the landscape shone bright with the glory of the Lord. They were badly frightened, but the angel reassured them. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I bring you the most joyful news ever announced, and it is for everyone. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, the Lord, has been born tonight in Bethlehem. How will you recognize him? You will find a baby wrapped in a blanket lying in a manger." Suddenly the angel was joined by a vast host of others, the armies of heavens, praising God. "Glory to the God in the highest heaven," they sang, "and peace on earth for all those pleasing him." When this great army of angels had returned again to the heaven, the shepherds said to each other, "Come on, let's go to Bethlehem. Let's see this wonderful thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about." They ran to the village and found their way to Mary and Joseph, and there was the baby lying in the manger. The shepherds told everyone what had happened and what the angels had said to them about this child. All who heard the shepherds' story expressed astonishment, but Mary quietly treasured these things in her heart and often thought about them. Then the shepherd went back again to their fields and flocks, praising God for the visit of the angels, and because they had seen the child just as the angels had told them.
Thank you. So we got a lot of stuff going on, right? We got angels, we got Herod, we've got Jerusalem, we got all this stuff. And we've heard that story our entire lives, right? Pretty accurate. Is there a chance, though, that maybe, just maybe, there could be something else going on? You think? And I would say absolutely so. So let's start to dig into the story a little bit from a metaphysical standpoint and see what we got. All right. So I'm going to go back into the story and do this one line at a time, right? All right. So we've got some major players in this thing, right? We've got Joseph. Metaphysically, Joseph represents wisdom. Okay? So Joseph is hanging out, and, he's being told that, hey, this thing is going to be happening, right? So in other words, this child's going to be born, and you're with this woman named Mary. So what does Mary represent? Mary represents, basically, if you can imagine this, she represents the soul that prepares itself for a higher life. I want you to understand something. Mary has the womb that is holding this thing, this baby. We're going to talk about what the baby represents in just a minute, but she is the container for this thing that's coming. She's preparing herself. She's pure. She's a virgin. That's what that stands for. It means it's a virgin. It's pure. It's absolute. And she's preparing herself, and she's getting ready for this thing to happen. Right? So she's hanging out, and so you've got Joseph's hanging out, and he's kind of going like, well, I'm not really sure if I'm supposed to be doing this or not. right? As the story goes. So what happens is he's hanging out and he's considering whether he should marry Mary or not. He's not 100% sure. It's kind of like, well, should I or shouldn't I do this? And all of a sudden, an angel shows up. An angel. What does an angel mean? Spiritual awareness. So an angel shows up, and it's kind of like, I just envisioned this, right? The angel walks up and goes, hey, Joseph, poof, what are you thinking? What are you doing? What do you mean you're thinking about whether you should take Mary or not? What are you, nuts? And so the angel just comes and, hey, wake up. Spiritual awareness, right? And so Joseph is sitting there, and the angel says, hey, don't hesitate to take Mary, or don't hesitate to start to prepare yourself for what's about to come. That's really what's going on. So there's something coming, it's going to be big, and get ready for it. Prepare yourself, right? And she'll have a son, and you'll name him Jesus, and that's going to fulfill all the prophecies. So when Joseph awoke, what happens? Joseph wakes up. He wakes up. Wow. This thing's going on. I'm sleeping. I woke up because an angel went poof and woke me, told me to pay attention. I'm going to start paying attention. That's what's going on, right? So he wakes up, and the angel does as the angel commanded and brought Mary home to be his wife. And again, she remained a virgin, pure, until her son was born, and they named him Jesus. Now, so what is this thing called Jesus? Jesus Christ represents the promise. It's really important not to forget that. It's the promise to everyone of the individual expression of the Christ. The I am that we hear talk about in the Old Testament. The I am that I am, the indwelling Christ. And it's the promise that each and every one of this has within us. That if we'll take the time and trust and go through a process that we'll talk about, guess what happens? It shows up. That's what Jesus represents, metaphysically, right? So Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem. Well, what does Bethlehem mean? It's inside of you. It's inside of your body, but just think about this. This thing that's going to take place, where this birth is going to happen inside of you. It's not a physical location. It's inside of you. That's what Bethlehem represents, right? Are we following this stuff so far? Is this kind of starting to make a little bit of sense? Okay, good. Good. Judea. What's Judea? Praise. So in other words, this thing is going to happen, this baby's going to be born, and part of it is going to be praise. That's what Judea represents. Now, Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. Who's this King Herod dude, right? Dun, dun, dun. All of a sudden, the bad guy shows up, right? Herod is ego consciousness. So I want you to understand something. Here's what's happening. This thing called Christ consciousness is ready to be born inside of you, right? That's what's happening. We're preparing for it. We're getting ready. And then all of a sudden, guess what shows up? Your ego. Ooh, really? You mean it's not just going to be a walk in the park? There might be something else going on? Yeah. It's called your ego is going to try and get in the way and do some nasty stuff. So what happens? So at about that time, some wise men show up. What do wise men represent? The inner wisdom of the soul. Actually, metaphysically, what's saying, it gets pretty intense, but what Fillmore says, metaphysically, these are gifts that we've gotten because of, honestly, past lifetimes, and lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes, and when the Christ consciousness starts to wake up, this stuff shows up. This wisdom, this inner wisdom. So that's what the wise men represent, right? So these wise men show up, lands, and from Jerusalem. What's Jerusalem? State of peace. So they're chilled out. They're peaceful. So these wise men, this inner wisdom, shows up when we're in a state of peace. That's what happens. Okay? And they go on to ask, well, where's the newborn king of the Jews? For we have seen his star. We've seen this thing. We don't know. All we know is there's a star out there and we're supposed to follow it. Intuition. So in other words, there's something inside of you that's going to be tapping you on your shoulder that's saying, pay attention. Pay attention. Pay attention. Follow that inner intuition. That's what's going on. That's what the star represents, your intuition, right? So they start following the star. They've seen a star far off in the eastern lands, and they've come to worship this thing called Jesus, this Christ consciousness, right? King Herod, dun 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 dun, ego consciousness, isn't happy. In fact, he's disturbed about it. And he starts asking questions, and then all of a sudden, all of Jerusalem is filled with rumors. What does Jerusalem represent? It is, hold on. Sorry about that. Did I put it up there? I may not have. There it is. State of peace. So in other words, all of a sudden the ego shows up, starts asking a bunch of questions. What starts going back and forth and gets rattled a little bit? Your state of peace. Right? Because the ego's ready to do battle. That's what's going on. The ego is ready to do battle with the Christ consciousness. That's what's going on. And so he calls a meeting of the Jewish leaders. So Herod rallies the troops, getting ready for the battle, right? And he asks, did the prophets tell where the Messiah would be born? And again, they say, yes, Bethlehem. And again, what's Bethlehem? Inside. Bethlehem is the thing that's going on inside of you when this baby starts to become born. So that's what's happening. Then Herod sent a private message to the wise men, and he's asked them to come see him at a meeting he found out from them exactly what time they first saw the star. Again, they found out the intuition was telling them this baby was going to be born, and Herod wants to find out where. And he goes on to say, again, go to Bethlehem and search for the child, the thing that's going on inside of you. Right? And when you find him, the sneaky little devil says what? He says, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him. Worship him. Really? Do you really think the ego is going to worship the Christ consciousness? Really? Probably not. No. What's he trying to do? He's trying to find out where it is so that he can do what? Kill it. That's what he's trying to do. The ego is trying to kill the Christ consciousness once it finds out what you're up to. Right? All right. So, after the interview, the wise men start out again, and look, the star, once again, their intuition tells them, hey, go to Bethlehem, go within. That's where this thing is. That's where the Christ consciousness is. It's within. That's where it's sitting. And they go there and they enter the house where the baby and Mary and his mother were, and they threw themselves down before him, worshiping. So the intuition finally realizes the Christ consciousness has showed up, and they start worshiping the Christ consciousness. The wisdom goes, wow, check that out, right? And they show up with gifts, right? So what are the gifts? Gold, which is the riches of spirit. Frankincense, metaphysically, means the beauty of spirit. And myrrh, which is the eternity of spirit. So here's the thing. When the Christ consciousness shows up for you, what's going to happen is you're going to receive gifts. That is part of the gifts of Christ consciousness. And that's what the wise men were giving. They were giving the gifts of what shows up when the Christ consciousness happens. That's what the three gifts represent. They also call them subconscious reserve forces, which I think is pretty cool. So in other words, there's a lot of stuff that's going on when this thing starts to unfold. Right? But when they returned to their own land, they didn't go through Jerusalem. Again, what's Jerusalem? Jerusalem basically is the state of peace. They didn't go there. Where did they go? They went through Egypt. Why did God tell them, go to Egypt? Egypt, the subconscious mind. Now, I want you to understand this because can get a little bit of confusion. There's confusion there, right? What basically it's saying is, once this thing shows up, just understand, in my opinion, my impression is that what it's saying is, you got some work to do. And we need to do it on a subconscious level. Why do we need to do work on a subconscious level? Take a guess. Get rid of the ego. That's where all these false identities are that we've been programmed to believe our entire life. And the Bible is basically telling you, you've got to go through the subconscious to clear all this crap out. That's what it's saying. That's what Egypt represents, the subconscious mind. And it's like, wow, that's amazing. So they got to go through Egypt. You've got to go through the subconscious mind. That's where it is. Holy cow, this is pretty impressive. Flee Egypt with the baby and his mother, and the angel said, and stay there until I tell you to return, for King Herod, that nasty King Herod, is going to try and kill the child. So the ego is going to try and kill the child. But if you hide, if you go to the subconscious, it can't kill it. And that's the message that they were being told, right? And so that night they left for Egypt with Mary and the baby, and they stayed there until his death. And Herod was furious when he found out about it. So the ego freaked out. When the ego thinks it's going to lose control, when the ego thinks it's going to be no more, guess what happened? It freaks out. As you start to go down your own spiritual path, and you start to develop your own Christ consciousness, and you start to play with this stuff, guess what's going to happen to the ego? It's going to freak out. There's going to be moments where it absolutely is going to freak out. Has anybody had that experience? Yeah. That's what happens. Right? So he was furious when he learned about it, and also he was mad that the astrologers disobeyed him. So he sent soldiers to Bethlehem, the state of peace. He sent soldiers to Bethlehem, and he ordered them to kill every baby boy 2 years old and under, both in the town and on the nearby farms, for the astrologers had told him when the star, their intuition first happened, that it happened 2 years before. So then what happens is Herod dies. The ego dies, right? And an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and told him, get up and take the baby and his mother back to Israel, back to a state of peace, so that you can, because they're gone. So they returned immediately to Israel. Again, Israel is, there we go, spirit of consciousness. So then when they return to Israel, now what's happening is they're coming in and showing up not from the state of the ego, but they're showing up with spiritual consciousness. That is the journey. That's what's going on metaphysically in the book of Matthew. Now let's look at it as a quick review, and a lot of it's the same, but there's some little differences here which I think are pretty cool. So in the book of Luke, everyone's required to return to his ancestral home. Everyone's returning. We're all going home. That's what's going on, right? And because Joseph was a member of the royal line, and we all are, we all had to go to Bethlehem. Again, the inside, we all go back inside. He took with him Mary, his fiancée, and while they were there, it came time for a baby to be born. Here's the little nuances. She gave birth to her child. She wrapped him in a blanket and laid him in a manger. That's always a part of the Christmas scene, right? So what's up with the blanket and the manger? What's going on there? Blanket and manger. I want you to understand something. It's the feeling. It's not the physical representation of a blanket, which keeps you warm, and the manger, the place where they lay down, they rest. It's the feeling. So in other words, when this thing shows up, you're going to feel it. That's what the blanket and the manger represent. Right? And she did that because there was no room in the inn or the village. We've always heard that. There's no room. There's no room. Well, what's there no room for? In human consciousness. So in other words, when the Christ is born, when that consciousness is born, there's no room in human consciousness for it. That's what it represents when it says there's no room in the inn. That's exactly what it means. And then all of a sudden you've got these shepherds, right? That night some shepherds were in the fields outside of the village guarding their flocks of sheep. So what do the shepherds represent? They're protectors. They're the ones that are going to protect us. They're the physical protectors, right? So they're hanging out. They're watching everything. And then all of a sudden, an angel appeared. Angel, spiritual wisdom showed up. And guess what they do? They freak out. They were badly frightened. So we've got these things that are protecting us physically. All of a sudden, something shows up, some spiritual wisdom, and the first reaction is going to be, whoa! There's a little bit of fear going on, right? So there's fear going on. But the angels reassured them, hey, chill out, relax, don't be afraid. Everything's going to be all right. And there's the most joyful news ever announced, and it's for everyone. So in other words, this just doesn't apply to me, it doesn't apply to you, it applies to everyone. And that is the Savior, the Messiah, the indwelling Christ, has been born tonight in Bethlehem. It's been born within you. It's been born within everyone. How will you recognize him? Once again, you'll find a baby wrapped in a blanket lying in a manger. You'll feel it. You'll know it. The warmth and the rest. That's how you'll know it. Suddenly the angel was joined by a vast host of others, the armies of heaven praising God. Glory to God in the highest heaven, they sang, and peace on earth for all those. When this great army of angels had returned again to heaven, the shepherds said to each other, hey, let's go. Let's go to Bethlehem. Let's go back to the state of peace. Let's go back there. We were there. This angel showed up, got a little concerned, but now we can relax. We can go back to the state of peace. Right? And that's what's going on. And they said, let's see this wonderful thing that has happened, which is the Lord has told us about. They ran to the village and found their way back to Mary and Joseph, love and wisdom, and there was a baby lying in the manger, and they could feel it. The shepherds told everyone what had happened and what the angel had said to them about this child. All who heard the shepherd's story expressed astonishment, but Mary quietly treasured these things in her heart and often thought about them. So, that's the metaphysical interpretation. So what's really going on this Christmas? What's the real story of Christmas? The real story of Christmas is this idea that we all inside of us have this divine seed that's planted. And if we take the time and we really focus on this and we really start to acknowledge it, not only in ourselves but of each other, what will happen is this seed will start to grow in you. And within that seed, you've got all of this knowledge, this wisdom, the spiritual insight that starts to happen. And this baby is born. And it is a real thing. It's really, really happens. When I was at the drive-thru years and years and years ago, literally what I was told was, Mike, the story of Jesus is a beautiful story. Jesus Christ, no matter what anybody tells you, was an actual man. Historically, it's been proven time and time and time again. There really was a Jesus. Now, there can be a lot of discussion about the stories and what they represented and what he did and what he didn't do, but the physical man called Jesus Christ was really a person. He really, really was. And he did some really, really, really amazing things. But to me, what I was told was that that's just the physical part, but you're missing the whole picture. The whole picture is what he really came down here to do. In a very simple way, was just to remind you and tell you to wake up. To never forget who and what you are. And who our brothers and sisters are. We're all part of the divine. We all are. We all have this little seed within us. And if we just take the time to slow down enough and to remember who we are, and no matter what it looks like, no matter what everything else that's going on in the world right now, no matter what it looks like in our own world and in the big picture world, when we slow down enough, we can actually start to play with this thing. Because it's there. And it's there for each and every one of us. And now when you look at the story of Jesus and the story of Christmas, And I always say this, that I honestly believe that it is the most powerful time of the year. It's because we all start to acknowledge this one little thing called love, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And when we can stand in it for a few minutes, the ability for it to change our lives is second to none. And Jesus knew that. And he just came down here to remind us that. And that's what he did, in a very simple way, in a very pure way, in a very beautiful way. And so my hope and prayer for you this Christmas season, as we begin to prepare for the birth of Jesus, is that maybe in your own way, maybe you can stop and maybe have a little conversation. Maybe even have a little conversation with Jesus. Because my feeling is that Jesus is very much alive. He's very much there for us. He's very much wanting to be celebrated. But I think his celebration goes way more than just him. In fact, I'm pretty convinced of it. That he was just a messenger, a really cool messenger. But his messenger was just, listen, don't forget who you are. You're the divine seed of God. And with that, there's some really amazing things you can do. Really amazing things you can do. Don't forget that. And so my hope and prayer for you is this Christmas season, don't forget who you are. You are the divine seed of God, each and every one of you. I don't care, man, woman, white, black, straight, gay, I don't care. It means nothing. We all come from the same place, and we're all going to the same place. And the more we can start to acknowledge that we're all the same, regardless of what everything else out there tries to tell us, the more we can just say that we're really, truly, honestly all the same, then we get to celebrate in this wonderful thing, this wonderful connection, this wonderful family, and also have an amazing, amazing Christmas. God bless and Merry Christmas to you.